Hi everyone, this is Daniel Tekanoff. This video is the study companion to 1 second per year, your share of time with your U.S. representative. At the end of the Constitutional Convention of 1787, Colonel George Mason had written down a number of objections to the new Constitution on the back of the pages that they had been using as a report of the various constitutional terms they were discussing. And in there, one of the objections was that there was no Declaration of Rights, and that the Declaration of Rights in the states was no security for the rights of the citizens. In those objections, Colonel George Mason also stated that in the House of Representatives there was not the substance but only the shadow of representation, and this could never produce proper information or inspire confidence in the people, and that the laws would be made by men little concerned in and unacquainted with the citizenry. Then Madison adds a notation to his notes after the convention is over, referring to the fact that after the objections made by George Mason and Edmund Randolph and Elbridge Gerry, an attempt was made to blunt those objections. And on the very last day of the convention, September 17, 1787, when all the delegates came together to sign the new Constitution, George Washington stood up and asked them to change the ratio of representation from 40,000 people per representative to 30,000 people. That passed unanimously, and an erasure was made in the document itself. They smudged out 40 and wrote 30. If you go to the National Archives and look at the original Constitution, you can see that smudge and change there yourself with your own eyes. So as George Mason's objections get turned into a pamphlet and that's being read by the citizens, James Madison feels he has to answer the charge. And so in Federalist number 55, he takes on the charge, and he realizes that first, the charge is that there is such a small number of representatives that they will be an unsafe depository for the public interests. Secondly, that the representatives would not possess a proper knowledge of local circumstances of their own voters. Thirdly, that the representatives would be taken from the class of citizens that would sympathize least with the feelings of the mass of the people, and that they would be most likely basically to become corrupt with power. And that the fourth part of the charge was that as defective as the number is already at the beginning, it's just going to get worse over the course of time as the population increases. Here, James Madison harkens back to Federalist number 10. The language from Federalist number 10 may even be better than here, so I'll read it real quick. In the first place, it is to be remarked that however small the republic may be, the representatives must be raised to a certain number in order to guard against the cabals of a few, and that however large it may be, they must be limited to a certain number in order to guard against the confusion of a multitude. The main point that Madison makes in Federalist number 55 is that he's taking for granted that the number of representatives in the House of Representatives will be increased, will be augmented from time to time, pursuant to the apportionment clause in the U.S. Constitution. He explains how the Constitution provides for a census to be taken, and that the number can be augmented for every 30,000 inhabitants, and that he's expecting augmentations or additions to Congress to continue to be made. And so he isn't sure what's going to happen in the future, so he raises the question whether or not this is truly safe. Then Madison makes a point that was repeatedly made by Madison and Hamilton, that the state legislatures would come to the aid of the citizens if the federal government became too powerful or corrupt. And as it turns out, that does not appear to be a valid assumption. Here's the biggest point to be taken from Federalist number 55. Madison is saying that he has no idea how large the population is going to grow. That would require a prophetic spirit. But from looking at things as they were at that point in time. He was saying in the near term and the middle term, the size of Congress should be safe. In the long term, he's not sure what to do. We are now in Madison's long term. Then we go on to look at Federalist number 56. In there, Madison talks about the second charge that the House of Representatives is too small to possess a due knowledge of the interest of its voters. And he acknowledges here this is an important principle that the representative ought to be acquainted with the interests and circumstances of his voters. Madison says here that the foresight of the convention has taken great care that the progress of the population may be accompanied with a proper increase of the representative branch in government. And here we have some of the best evidence of how the framers actually were thinking at the time. He's saying that the House of Representatives seems to give the fullest assurance that a representative for every 30,000 inhabitants will render the House a safe and competent guardian of the interest of the citizens. So here, Madison actually seems to be stating to the public that they're assuming that there's going to be a representative for every 30,000 voters, and it turns out in history that is not how things came to be. Then we move on to Federalist number 58, where Madison makes real clear what the intent of the framers is with respect to the apportionment clause. There are two parts to the apportionment clause. Here he says the unequivocal objects are first to readjust from time to time the apportionment of representatives to the number of inhabitants. In other words, as populations change, as people move from place to place, you have to have adjustments. And in our system, we adjust every 10 years with a census. But the second object of the apportionment clause was to increase the number of representatives in the House as the population increased. That fell out of our system in 1920, as I have shown in other videos on this channel. Then quickly going back into the Constitutional Convention itself, here's one of Madison's own quotes, which he wrote in his own hand in his notes. A republic may be converted into an aristocracy or oligarchy as well, by limiting the number capable of being elected. So here is a graph of the world population. And remember, Madison was saying he doesn't know what's going to happen with the growth of the population. But one thing is clear, none of the framers had any anticipation that world population growth and the nation's population growth would basically explode the way it did. They had some expectation that there was going to be growth from immigration and expansion west. But they could not possibly have foreseen future rapid human population growth from historical trends such as the Industrial Revolution, the Scientific Revolution, and the Medical Revolution. And what happens is, after 1800, the world population begins to just rapidly expand, and it goes from 1 billion to 7 billion within a very short amount of time, and our representation system does not keep up. Here we focus on rapid human population growth in the United States itself, and we look specifically at the ratio of representation in Congress. This right-hand column where it says ratio of representation, the ratio is 1 representative over, in this first column, 37,000 citizens. And as you see, from 1790 to 1900, you begin getting a real disconnect between ordinary citizens and Congress as the ratio of representation starts to push up towards 200,000 people per representative in the House. Then what happens is in 1910, we reach 435 representatives in the House, and that's where we have sat for 100 years. No increase of representatives as the human population continues to expand at a very rapid pace. And so now we're pushing up towards nearly 1 million citizens per representative. That cannot possibly meet the descriptions that Madison gave us in Federalist numbers 55 through 58. So now with that little bit of education under our belt, let's look at the 1 second per year slides again. Let's go through the math. There are 52 weeks in a year, 40 work hours in a week. That's 2,080 work hours per year. Take that, multiply it by 60 minutes. That's 124,800 work minutes per year. Take that number, times it by 60 seconds. That's nearly 7.5 million work seconds per year. So now, we take how many people are represented by each U.S. representative in the House of Representatives. They represent 761,000 people right now, and that is just going up, up, up. So we'll use a rounded figure. Let's say they represent 750,000 people. Divide that by 7,500,000 work seconds. Each share of time to each citizen is 10 seconds per year, but the representative is not meeting with their voters the entire time. In fact, only a very short amount of that time. Let's make a generous assumption that the representatives are spending 10% of their time actually meeting with their voters. That would mean 10% of 10 seconds, or that your share of time with your U.S. representative is 1 second per year. Clearly, this is not representative government as described by James Madison in Federalist Numbers 55 through 58. And that is how your share of representation in the United States governing system is only 1 second per year. If you would like to learn more, please take a look at my book, Guide to the First Article 5 Convention of the People.